Hey everyone, how's it going? Last time I talked about the Batman of Arkham, and I brought up how in there we had Batman teaming up with his enemies. Now we'll be continuing that theme, but unlike the Batman of Arkham, this will be a little different because this alliance is way more unstable. And that is in IDW's Transformers, Robots in Disguise. But before I could talk about the latest adventures of the Golden Children of Hasbro, I should give a brief history of this particular run of the Transformers comics by IDW. You see, after the fall of the last comic company to hold the rights to the Transformers comics, Dreamwave Productions, it went to IDW, who originally planned to continue the Dreamwave's original stories, but then chose to instead start fresh and do their own thing, though they would bring back some concepts that did originate from Dreamwave's run. The IDW run would have two phases. The first phase was pretty standard, the Autobots and Decepticons fighting on Earth, and eventually it would start to change a little bit in the 2009 miniseries All Hail Megatron, and finally conclude with 2011's Chaos. Phase 2, which we're covering right here in this book, gets a little interesting because in here we actually dive into the end of the war and the possible peacetime of the Autobots and Decepticons. The reason I'm covering Phase 2 and not Phase 1 is for three reasons. One, I actually took a break from Transformers comics shortly after and just stuck with the shows and games and tried to tolerate the nightmares that were the Bay films. And when I did get back into the comics, I wound up starting in Phase 2, because screw chronological order. Two, and most Transformers fans will usually agree, Phase 2 has the more interesting stories. Not saying Phase 1 was bad or anything, Phase 1 did have some great stories and introduced and created its own unique take on the Transformers lore, especially towards the end. But it also had to start with the usual song and dance. And of course, you can find new ways to play with this story, but in the end, you can't beat something that's a little bit more original. And three, it also gave lesser known characters some spotlight, which is great since there are a lot of interesting characters in Transformers who don't always get to really shine. And because I'm gonna be asked these questions, let's just get them over with. Top 5 favorite Autobots. Number 1, Grimlock. Number 2, Rodimus. Number 3, World. Number 4, Bulkhead. Number 5, Optimus Prime. Favorite Decepticons, that being Shockwave, Soundwave, Megatron, Tarn, and Starscream. Alright, let's get this over with. Now, let's get into the story. And as usual, warning spoilers, and yeah, I know it's kind of weird since this is the Transformers we're talking about, but yeah, not for kids. As I mentioned, this takes place in the second phase of IDW's run. The war of the Autobots and Decepticons are over. Megatron is MIA. Things should be good, right? Yeah, about that. Megatron wasn't the only leader to go. Optimus Prime, after the events of All Hail Megatron and Chaos, grew tired and felt unworthy to be both the leader of the Autobots or be called a Prime. He went into self-exile, went by his original name Orion Pax, and split the matrix of leadership into two, giving it to Bumblebee and fellow Prime Rodimus. But being Rodimus' partnership did not last, with both having different approaches to going forward. Bumblebee wanted to stay on Cybertron, while Rodimus believed that they should leave and find the lost knights of Cybertron. Not those knights. Rodimus would take a ship called the Lost Light, pick up a crew, and would leave. But something went wrong and the ship would appear to have blown up during the launch. Don't worry, they're fine. Well, okay, 3 of them aren't fine, but most of the crew are okay. So after that tragedy, Bee and fellow Autobot Prowl are now left running Cybertron. And it is not easy. Along with the Decepticons, who are forced to have tracking chips installed that also suppress some of their unique abilities, such as Skywarp's teleportation ability, and will also blow up their heads if Bee or Prowl believe that they were out of line. Amanda Waller would be proud. They also have the returning Cybertronians who chose not to play a part in the war and were deemed non-aligned indigenous life forms, or NAILs for short, by both factions, and both sides aren't fans. Bumblebee does get help from former Autobot turned Nail Metalhawk, who they chose to be their representative, but that will only go so far, especially since besides the factions, Cybertron itself has gone through a massive change in both appearance
appearance in nature. We even have some parts of the planet attacking the ships that are arriving, carrying returning Cybertronians.
Okay, so let's round this up. We got fractured leadership, factions who are really close to just killing each other, and a planet that just really doesn't seem to want them there. How can we make this worse? Oh, how about we have it where Prowl is doing some really shady stuff with RC?
Yep. Bumblebee and the others are kinda screwed, but when they are offered help from Megatron's old second-in-command and always opportunist Starscream, could this lead to things getting better for this new Cybertron? Or is peace between the three factions truly impossible?
As usual, I'll leave it up to you.
This is a pretty good jumping on point for people getting into the IDW comics along with More Than Meets the Eye, the comic series that shows what Rodimus Prime is doing with his crew the Lost Light while they're looking for the Knights of Cybertron. It gives you enough info to be caught up and grabs you immediately with its premise. The story was written by John Barber, who is already well experienced of writing Transformers at the time. You get a sense that he's taken his time with these characters, while at the same time making it easy for new readers to understand them. Speaking of, let's talk about the characters.
Now, there are a lot of characters in this story. I mean, this is, about a society being rebuilt. So, much like Earth X, I'm going to talk about mostly the main focuses, though I will talk about a few other characters while discussing them.
First, we'll cover the current leader of the Autobots, Bumblebee. Now, as I mentioned, this is a character who has his work cut out for him. You can tell he's trying his best to make things work, but you can also tell that it's getting to him. He questions himself a lot, and sometimes he wonders if Optimus Prime was right to trust him with this responsibility. Plus, with several bots trying to kill him, you can guess that it doesn't help his mental state. But besides all that, he shows determination that Optimus found worthy enough to give him half the Matrix. Next, we got the second-in-command, Prowl, who, if you're only familiar with from the TV shows, this is going to be a very shocking take. Prowl believes in preserving peace no matter what, and makes several decisions that are morally questionable. He does this along with fellow Autobot RC, who in this version used to be a war-torn barbarian who finds it very difficult to live in this, well, kind of, but not really peacetime. So, yeah, there's that deadly combination. Prowl in here reminds me of a more serious version of Sentinel Prime from Transformers Animated, where he's more focused on controlling the population than working with them as equals. I mean, it gets to the point where some bots actually believe that him and B sabotaged the Lost Light. Now, of course, B wouldn't do that, but Prowl, well, that's a story for another time. Then we got the representative of the Nails, Metalhawk, though he really hates that they are called that. He's essentially the peacekeeper between B and Prowl, which, as you can tell, is not an easy task, and the only one who actually is against the ID chips on the Decepticons. He's even the first of the three to actually trust Starscream, while B and Prowl are quick to believe him to be working for Ratbat. Metalhawk also provides some deadpan humor, which is pretty hilarious. Now we go to my favorite Decepticon, Starscream, who truly gets a shine in this story. And here, he definitely has a challenge. He has to convince B and Prowl that he really is on their side. Yeah, Starscream, the Decepticon who's notorious for backstabbing anyone if it means getting to the top. Here though, he's wise enough to know the best thing to do in this situation is not to start another war, regardless of what his fellow Decepticons think. This would begin a very interesting journey for Starscream, but like Prowl, that is a story for another time. And finally, we got Ratbat, the current leader of the Decepticons, and essentially the main antagonist in the story. Again, there are other Decepticons that they have to deal with after him, but most of them aren't that big of a threat, or they're just set up for later stories like Bombshell. As for Ratbat, he's a pretty solid villain here. This is the biggest role he's gone to play since that crazy story in the Marvel Universe where he ran a brainwashing car wash. This is a character who is almost as good as a liar and schemer than Starscream.
Which makes sense. I mean, he used to be a politician before the war.
Ratbat really proved that he is more than just another servant of Soundwave. My only real complaint is that he leaves a little too early in the story, and I feel like there was even more we could have done with him. Moving on from characters, we have the art, which is done by comic book artist Andrew Griffith, who does a great job combining the styles of G1 and the styles of the Cybertron games, along with colorist Josh Birchman, who really makes each character pop, which is very much needed since there are a lot of characters in here. Characters who have some really creative designs thanks to Griffith. In conclusion, Robots in Disguise is a great start to the Cybertron side of Phase 2, and I highly recommend checking it out whether you're a longtime Transformers fan or someone who wants to get into the series about the beloved bots.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. And you're probably wondering, what is the next theme? Well, Transformers is many things. Awesome toys, really great comics. But one thing that we usually see it as is a beloved TV show. So the next one will also be based on a beloved TV show. Which show? Well, funny thing, I've already told you.